red state or vice versa. We can also tell you tonight that based on the last presidential election electorate, the people who turned out, right now tonight, 10% of votes have roughly been cast in the election by that precedent, because the number is 14 million ballots have already been cast this cycle, just since this early voting became available. If turnout's like last time, that's about 10%. If it's a little higher or lower, shifts a little bit. Now, none of those 14 million plus votes are counted yet. They are held in secure facilities, as has happened for many, many decades while we've had various types of early votes. They'll be held 14 million and growing. We know the race is tied right now in most key swing states. There are these 7 battleground states that shape the race. They're all largely within the margin of error, which means they're tied, according to polling statistics. The current data does not suggest a meaningful winner. That is how close it is. And just to give you a very clear example, because there is so much hype and misinformation right now, contrast that to a different question than voting. If you ask people, do you prefer to eat a meat or vegetarian dinner at an event in November? Maybe election night, maybe a wedding. If you poll that and people say meat by 15 points, then in an accurate poll, that is clearly the more popular option. An accurate poll will not swing another 15 points back in November. But these polls say that it's all within the margin of error, which means no one can reliably take anything from tied polls. That's true in 6 of the 7 states except one, which is more news for you tonight. In North Carolina, Trump is up by 4 points in the Washington Post poll among registered voters. So those are some numbers. We will keep reporting them. If you're looking for something more exciting than these type of numbers and the truth, like people who run around claiming every little change in a poll means a big deal, you'll have to go somewhere else, maybe online. If you're looking for coverage that wants to shape any number or factoid into some partisan narrative, that's also not here. But we will be going through those numbers I just did for you over the next 15 days, no matter what direction they head, including potentially a tied, boring, kind of no news here direction. That's the state of the race. Harris is touting her conservative support, campaigning with Liz Cheney in 3 of the states I mentioned, PA, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
Well, I think that in this election, and especially here in Pennsylvania, we have the opportunity to tell the whole world who we are. And we have the chance to say, you know, we're going to reject cruelty. We're going to reject the kind of vile vitriol that we've seen from Donald Trump.
I have said many times publicly, and I'll say it again, in many, many ways, Donald Trump is an unserious man. But the consequences of him being president of the United States are brutally serious.
That's the tag team closing. They also hammered the high stakes.
I know how quickly democracies can unravel. And I know that as Americans, we can become accustomed to thinking, well, we don't have to worry about that here. But I tell you, again, as someone who has seen firsthand how quickly it can happen, that is what's on the ballot.
We have in our grasp the ability to determine the course of our country. You know, every election we've said this is the one. This is the one. This truly is the one.
This is the one. And you could see we've actually heard both candidates talk about that. Both sides talk about this is so important. And hey, I know you've heard of that before, but it really is. The reasons they share, of course, are different. Now, Trump has had a far longer period of time to build his team and ground game. He's been more or less running for years since he lost his campaign in 20 and also lost an effort to steal it through the disruption of the peaceful transfer of power. So in that sense, he's got a lead on time. But Harris has a huge lead on the money game. Now, she's been raising money for a much shorter amount of time, but she's set records now for the biggest fundraising quarter ever, as the Times reports there. This quarter, as you see, raised $1 billion. That is just bananas. It speaks both to the unusual nature of her candidacy starting late, but there are plenty of late starters who wouldn't raise that kind of money. So it also shows an incredible unifying and enthusiastic mood across the Democratic Party, from grassroots donors to the big rich ones. Harris is getting a boost from big figures like Stevie Wonder in Georgia and Usher, coming off the Super Bowl, which is a reminder of his reach. Nobody does the Super Bowl halftime show without having huge reach in and beyond the U.S. He is helping her out in Atlanta, while Lizzo backs Harris in her native Detroit.
I'm proud to say that I voted early, and I voted for Kamala Harris.
We have the opportunity to choose a new generation of leadership for our country.
They say if Kamala wins, then the whole country will be like Detroit. Okay? Proud like Detroit. Resilient like Detroit.
We got work to do, Atlanta. ATL, we got work to do.
We're talking about the same Detroit that innovated the auto industry and the music industry. So put some respect on Detroit's name.
We ready. We what? Oh.
That's some of the energy there, and we've seen some major figures coming out, as you see here in the home stretch, from the big stars to the star of the party, Barack Obama. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has shown more erratic signs in his behavior. He's gone on bizarre tangents. He has, of course, done some things that are quite serious with the authoritarian threats to abuse power against his opponents, against American citizens. He just says it out loud in public. And then things that are just strange. Trump spent over 10 minutes, it was counted, at a rally over the weekend discussing the golfer Arnold Palmer's genitals. It is the kind of oddity that is strange to discuss. If you heard about it or saw that rally and were talking to anyone about it in your life, at work or at home, you'd struggle to even describe it. But it could be misleading to just skip or over-minimize what is happening. You could imagine if Joe Biden did such a 10-minute rant. NPR referred to the discussion of the golfing legend's, quote, manhood. Trump also used an obscenity to attack Harris, repeated the authoritarian language as I mentioned, casting American citizens as, quote, enemies. So we have the combination here of the Baroque and obscure, what Tim Walz calls weird, and the deadly serious. No one knows what's going to happen over these next 15 days and election night, but I can guarantee you one thing. If Donald Trump wins, he and his allies will point exactly to the things he's been saying over this weekend and in the last few months as a kind of public justification or acceptance. Not that these were overwrought pieces of rhetoric or jokes. No, they'll say, he told you he was going to do this, and he won. And now he's going to do it. And no one can say they weren't told in advance. Now, even in that context, there are top Republicans who've openly defended Trump's efforts to do all sorts of bad things, including break the law and steal the election, who draw a line at Mussolini. They don't join in and say American citizens are enemies, enemies who should be fought with violence, like other actual foreign enemies in, say, North Korea or Russia, where we have a ground war that we're partly supporting. They don't go that far. But they won't honestly face what Trump said. Here is Speaker Mike Johnson lying, claiming that the enemy comment was only about, say, foreigners, not Americans, when Trump literally name-checked American lawmakers like Pelosi. And that's what makes this a lie. DOA.
That's not what he's talking about there. What he's talking about is marauding gangs of dangerous, violent people who are destroying public property.
We have a lot of bad people. But when you look at Shifty Schiff and some of the others, yeah, they are, to me, the enemy from within. I think Nancy Pelosi is an enemy from within.
There it is. How do you know what Trump means? Because he tells you what he means and he repeats it. And Speaker Johnson, who previously has been on this program and is welcome to come back, is lying. Full stop. Kamala Harris is speaking on Trump's erratic behavior, too.
When he does answer a question or speak at a rally, have you noticed he tends to go off script and ramble? And generally, for the life of him, cannot finish a thought. And he has called it the weave. But I think we here will call it nonsense.
Now, Harris has found better ways to deal with this, not the overreacting, pearl-clutching, but still exposing it, still knowing that these are weaknesses for him, and often using what we saw there, a kind of a mocking joy mixed with what I also showed you tonight, which is her very serious warnings about the serious stuff. In any normal time, a person doing what Donald Trump is doing in public would be a very target-rich candidate indeed. But these are not normal times. in part because of him and in part because of larger factors we've explored. And so the question for the Democrats in the home stretch is, with so many targets, which are the best to focus on? And for Donald Trump, his aides are basically in a back and forth with him about whether to talk about someone's genitalia for 10 minutes or 8 minutes or 6 minutes. What's the right amount of time? How can you talk the boss out of at least going on so long like that? And how many times should he repeat, even when coaxed otherwise by his Fox News allies? No, he really means it. He means dictator. He means American enemies. He means abuse of power. Big questions. And, well, we take all comers on this program. Tonight we lead off with someone on the Democratic side, Governor Wes Moore from Maryland. He's been a vocal supporter of Harris this cycle. You can see them together here in some of the pictures we've pulled. And here he is with all the governors. We've got, what, Shapiro, Hochul, Healy, the whole gang on the Democratic side in a lot of the key states. Welcome, Governor.
It's good to see you, Ari.
Your thoughts on the questions I just raised. Target rich, but with 15 days, you got to focus.
Yeah. I mean, listen, if he weren't running for president of the United States, this would be deeply entertaining. The problem is that he is. The problem is that he is trying to cast himself as a serious candidate for the presidency, despite the fact that what he is saying is grossly offensive, is deeply inaccurate, and even his most serious advocates and surrogates are just basically trying to explain the things that come out of his mouth, because what comes out of his mouth is unexplainable. And so you're absolutely right, where, you know, part of the challenge of running against Donald Trump is there's so much. And what exactly do you focus on? And so one thing that I've been doing as we've been speaking to people is, if you really listen to what he is saying, he will go on and on and on about a multitude of different things. But one thing he will never talk about is how to make your life better. He'll talk about things that have offended him. He'll talk about people that have come after him. He'll talk about the problems of the world. But never once will he offer a real, tangible solutions to be able to address the issues that are actually impacting your life. And so I think when people say that, you know, when people tell you something, you should believe them, I also think that people should remember, when you're not hearing anything that is relevant to your life or your future, you really should believe them. Because if he were to be elevated to that office, he would not have a single policy, nor a single person around him whose effort and whose focus would be make your life better.
Yeah. You know, Governor, I don't know who you hang out with, what your vibe is with your friends, but it's almost like you're describing that friend that people don't want to be friends with anymore, where every time you get brunch, it's their life and problems. And sometimes that's okay. And then you get a beer and it's their life. And then 6 months later, it's their stuff. And you're sort of like, man, what world are you living in? And that person hasn't committed to public service, right? They're just maybe not an equal friend. That's the depiction I'm getting from you. How do you connect that with voters who still say, and you know this, and this is a bigger, perhaps political question for your team, they still say they're worse off now than they were 4 years ago economically. So maybe they're not getting the briefing from him, but they think of him as different from 4 years of Biden-Harris.
Yeah. He's also like one of those friends who, when the bill shows up, he just happens to have to go to the bathroom or has to take a phone call and just kind of sticks you with the bill. But I think the thing I think we have to, you know, do is, when you're looking at the policies that the Harris-Walz campaign is actually putting forward, they're actually putting together tangible policies that can address things like affordability of groceries and affordability of drug prices. They're putting